There. Let's bring in David Schultz, who's Professor of Political Science at Hamline University. David Schultz, thank you so much for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you in France 24. Would you agree with Tim Walz, who said earlier that we're now at an inflection point for the Trump administration because of what has happened and what important people in that administration have been saying?
I think he's absolutely correct at this point. And the inflection point is in lots of different ways. It's first in terms of, let's say, the political language that the Trump administration is using, both in terms of why it's doing enforcement and the actions it's using here, and the actions, or rather the statements it's using to describe what happened and trying to get people not to believe their eyes and their ears regarding the Alex Pretti shooting. That's one. But the inflection point is also an inflection point about really the very logic of the American constitutional system, where the federal government does have powers to be able to enforce its laws, but a constitution in the United States also says that the federal government can't force, can't compel, basically coerce states to do certain things. And so this is a controversy that's got partisan implications, legal implications, political ones, and it's really rearranging, I think, the political legal map of the United States right now.
Was there a sense of hypocrisy? Is there a sense of hypocrisy in the attempt to cast the late Mr. Pretti as a terror threat because he had a licensed firearm?
Yes, I mean, the Republican Party has embraced the Second Amendment, which is our amendment that guarantees a right for individual right to bear arms. And the party has become sort of a defender of this against the Democrats. And what we're now seeing is something very unusual here, where the Democrats are embracing the Second Amendment and saying he had a gun. Yes. Also, it's important to understand he had a gun, lawfully permitted to do so under state law and under the U.S. Constitution. And there's no indication whatsoever that at any point he took the gun out, aimed it at, or brandished it or something. And so contrary to some of the other people who have been commenting and saying, if you bring a gun to a protest, it's inherently violent or you're risking your life, the answer is no, that we have a legal right in the United States, for good or for bad, to be able to possess firearms, and people can show up. Again, if they point at somebody, that's a different story. But there's no indication that at any point that Alex Pretti took the gun out, threatened anybody in under way, separate form. And those agents did not even know, it appears, that he had a gun until such time as they tackled him to the ground.
Very different from the, I'm diverting a bit here, David, if you'll just bear with me. Very different from the case of, say, Kyle Rittenhouse back in 2020 in Wisconsin, when he had an automatic rifle that he brought to a protest, killed two people, tried to kill another person. He was, of course, acquitted at court, but a very different case. And again, exposing, again, that hypocrisy.
I think you're absolutely correct again. I mean, I've been telling my students that if we put politicians in jail or people in jail for hypocrisy, our prisons would be full of people. And this is sort of another situation here where many people are saying that the Trump administration and Republicans, especially when it comes to gun issues, are all over the map. They're all over the map in terms of defending it when it's appropriate for their cause and not. And also, some people would say there's an overlay here that it would traditionally used to be that if persons of color were carrying a gun, they would say, no, that's they shouldn't be able to do that, versus white people can do so, such as the Rittenhouse. But here we've got a white Caucasian U.S. American citizen, again, who's an ICU nurse, as about as sympathetic as the characters you can come up with, and looking at how now they're maligning him, it really does raise questions about principle versus hypocrisy.
Kristi Noem, key in this, I think, Secretary of State for Homeland Security. I mean, how can she keep her job given what she has said about him, which has been absolute lies, a fabric of lies that she's created to somehow justify how he was killed by 10 shots to his body while surrounded by ICE agents? How can she keep her job?
Well, that's a great question here, that if Trump were looking for some type of way of de-escalating the situation, he has an easy out. He could blame Kristi Noem for all this, fire her. Remember, he ran a show for 16 years in the U.S. called The Apprentice, where he was always saying, you're fired. So he's got an obvious way if he wants to de-escalate it. But you're absolutely correct here, because she's basically mischaracterizing what happened. Again, she's asking people to not believe what their eyes and their ears are telling them at this point. right. And she's really doing a lot to really inflame the situation, on top of which she's reaching judgments before any investigation has been completed. But nobody seems to be trusting her, or let's say the Justice Department right now, to do a fair and impartial investigation. And the fact that the federal government is excluding the state of Minnesota from participating in the investigation just reinforces that trust that there's a cover-up going on here too.
Speaking from the outside of the United States, David, to think that people don't have faith in an investigation that apparently is going to be led by the FBI and the border agents, it kind of makes you wonder what has happened to the status of something like the FBI, which we tend to hold as being something that is to aspire to in terms of law enforcement, in terms of justice. What has happened?
This is what happens when you get justice and law enforcement that becomes politicized. And what's also to add to this here, if we look at the history of the United States, generally we expect the federal government, our national government, to be on the side of justice and on the good guys, that they're going to do the right thing. And you usually think of from the civil rights era in the United States, when states were fighting, some states were fighting the U.S. government to prevent integration, to prevent civil rights. Here now we have this characterization that people are not trusting the national government. I was listening to some governors from Republican states in the United States now also starting to be worried and say that, you know, maybe we can't trust the federal government, and maybe the federal government, the Trump administration, needs to exit from here. So this is really changing our perceptions of the Justice Department, of the FBI, and again, it speaks to what happened when we get things politicized. This reminds me of the days when Richard Nixon was president a half a century ago, where he used the FBI to persecute political enemies and the Justice Department to do the same thing.
David Schultz, fantastic analysis. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. Professor of Political Science at Hamline University. Before you go, sir, the weather is appalling where you are. How are you coping? Everything okay?
We're doing okay, but it's very, very cold here. We're about 20 degrees below zero, and it's certainly adding to the tension around here.
David, thank you. That's our next subject, the weather. David Schultz, Professor of Political Science at Hamline University. Stay warm, sir. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you.